This is our sixth annual celebration of International Women's Day, and indeed my honor to kick it off. And I, of course, want to thank, as Sarah and Janelle Morgan Ndagwe, I want to make sure I say Janelle's name right. They are the co-chairs, and the planning committee just did outstanding work. I'm sure all of you last night, as you looked at the snow in some areas, are thinking, oh, is it going to happen? And indeed, we got a little break, and the planning that went into this was just outstanding. I'm going to say just a few words about why I think this is so critical, and then I want to introduce the two speakers that will follow me. I want to start off with a quote by Maya Angelou, a poet and author and civil rights activist, and she said, "Each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it possibly, even without claiming it, she stands up for all women." And what I take away from that is that a lot of your resilience and your beauty and your brilliance sometimes is not even intentional, just by being present today, telling the city, the entire city, that indeed your rights, your daughter's rights, your mother's rights, your grandmother's rights are critically important and to never be taken for granted. Seattle has been shaped by the work of countless strong, resilient women, and we could go through all the rank and file, from council members to firefighters to city light line women, and so many more who are invaluable to our city. Many of you are in jobs that perhaps were gender favored in historical years, and we recognize that as we try to break through barriers. We recently lost a trailblazing woman in Peggy Maxey, and some of you know who she was, the first Black woman to be elected to the Washington State Legislature. I happen to know her family well. I had the honor to visit her a few weeks ago before she passed in the hospital, and it's people like Peggy Maxey that indeed paved the way. She particularly fought for fair representation for the Central District and helped create an equal rights amendment for our state constitution, making Washington one of the first states to ratify a gender equity amendment. That was indeed trailblazing work. While we clearly have made a lot of work toward gender equity, we know that we're scratching the surface still, that this work is not to be, again, taken for granted. It has to be extremely intentional, and that's why, again, on the sixth anniversary, if you will, our sixth event like this, we have to keep doing it to reassure ourselves that we have the energy to keep this fight alive. There are over 215,000 women-owned businesses in Washington State, generating roughly $33 billion in revenue each year. A lot of people want to know why I do the work for minority and women-owned businesses, because indeed they are the lifeblood as everyone tries to compete against the monolithic giants. I always say that it's truly the small businesses and the entrepreneurs of the world that will make us not only sane, but allow us to hire from our communities, recycle our money, and give that sort of that rhythm, that vibe, if you will, into a city that's equally important. So as we talk about how we, throughout the day, operationalize equity and inclusion, not just on paper, but through our action, I looked at the who's who and speakers, and I think you're going to be indeed in store for a rare treat. Now let me talk about the two speakers that you're about to hear. One is very easy to introduce. That would be my wife. But I want to start off with Deputy Mayor Adia Emery, who many of you know, part of her portfolio as a deputy mayor is helping define and implement our One Seattle vision for a healthy, accessible, welcoming, and sustainable community. Her personal story is a refugee who came to the United States for an education and opportunity. She understands and advocates for the needs of Seattle's immigrant communities as well. Before joining our mayor's office, I sort of plucked her to be a deputy mayor. She was the division director for transportation operations for Seattle's Department of Transportation and oversaw policies to strengthen safety and align transit-oriented development with the city's equity values. It was not in an introduction. I actually met Deputy Mayor Emery when we were working on the privacy surveillance ordinance when I was on the city council. And quite honestly, I admired how you commanded the attention of everyone. And again, this is a very male-dominated meeting. I don't know why, it just happened to be. And I had no way of knowing when I first walked in the room many years ago who was in charge. I mean, you know, it's not like anyone had a title in front of them. And I listened to this person spoke and this person, and you weren't the loudest person in the room. And I heard this opinion and that opinion. There was another council member, and they were trying to work through these very critical issues and how we deal with technology, but how we protect your privacy rights. And then when Deputy Mayor Emery opened her mouth and started to actually lead us, if you will, if I'm going to be candid with you, I saw her brilliance. And then I said, if I'm ever so honored to be mayor, I know how to tap into talent. And indeed, you led those discussions. So that's Autumn Emery. Now I'm going to talk about Joanne Harrell. What you'll see in her bio is indeed an impressive resume. It certainly dwarfs mine, and I say that in all seriousness. I was just a football player in college, but she was studying business and communications, and I said, well, I'm probably going to be broke with all the things I'm going to do. I need a person that I could just sort of grab onto those coattails and ride it all the way up there. We met in college at the University of Washington. As a professional, she was a retired senior director of the Artificial Intelligence, Sustainability, and Market Development Strategy at Microsoft, where she worked from 2001 to 2021 when she retired. She also was appointed to the University of Washington as a Board of Regent from 2009 to 2020. She served as the board chair for 2012 to 2013. And she's the founding member of the Board of Regents Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee. She also chairs the Board of Equal Opportunity Schools, which is a national organization working with public school systems to optimize optimize the ability for all of the students. And she also serves as the board of directors from the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, indeed one of our superstar organizations here in cancer research, and she serves on the board of Home Street Bank as well. She also is a past, no wonder I can't get a hold of you. I'm looking at all this stuff you're doing. She's also the past University of Washington Foster Business School Fritzsky Endowed Leadership Chair, and continues to serve as a member of the University of Washington's Regent Advisory Committee on Real Estate. Now that's in her resume. What I do want to say in closing is this, I met Joanne when we were in college, and I played basketball with her brother, and we started working in telecom together back in the early 80s, and we've been together for many decades. And as a woman, and as an African-American woman, I wish I had a nickel for every time I saw her receive a microaggression or just blatant disrespect. I'll just tell you two short stories. One is when I actually first got elected, I thought this was unusual. I was the managing partner of a downtown law firm, and we're going to do the swearing in my office. And Joanne we were dressed down that day. I was getting ready to leave the firm and come to City Hall, and we had on jeans, and my wife had on jeans, and the lady came up to me, and there were a few people there to do swearing me in, and she looked at Joanne and she said, "Oh, this must be your secretary." And I said, no, but why would you think that? And we had that discussion, and Joanne, just as classy as she could be, just sort of played it off a little bit. And I was a little upset, probably more upset than I should have been. Another example would be when I first got elected as mayor a couple of years ago, we were at an event, and I'm sitting here, and Joanne's sitting right here, and a guy wanted to shake my hand, and he was sort of a big shot at where we were, and he reached across, and I'm telling you, his armpit was like 2 inches from her face, and he's reaching in front of me like this, and I'm looking, I'm thinking, who does that? And for those that know me, I would say, hey man, your armpit's in my wife's face right here, right? And I don't think he would have done that if that were his mother sitting right there. I just give you two sort of almost playful examples. But I think one reason why why I admire her so much is she truly is my rock. And, she usually wakes up before me, and she'll send me almost every morning some kind of text, some kind of article. She reads the Wall Street Journal, she reads the New York Times, she reads newspaper after newspaper. She's extremely well read. And she's had some, she lost her mother. She'll talk about that at a young age. And her father, who was a vet, raised her spit and polish kind of person in terms of how he lived his life. He was a disciplined kind of person. And her drive, I think, being just a young girl, 12 or 13 years old, losing her mother, being raised by her father and her siblings, her drive to me is just always has been my inspiration. And so I jokingly say her resume, mine pales in comparison to hers. And I'm real serious when I say that. I truly did marry up. And I'm not ashamed to say that. So I present to you Deputy Mayor Autumn Emery and First Lady Joanne Harrell.
Well, I thought I would start off. The mayor talked a little bit about my background, and I wanted to share, First Lady. This is what a prestigious moment is for me, to be able to sit next to you and have a dialogue, which I just cherish every moment, every time I'm around you. So I'm so graceful and just happy to be here. But I wanted to start off by what this reminds me of, right? You know, I wanted to share a little bit of culture from Ethiopia, where I'm from. The women have this, what we call coffee ceremony. So in the coffee ceremony, we have sweets, treats, we roast the coffee from scratch, and it's a way in which traditionally the women have gathered. They take turns in hosting the ceremony, and it's a way in which they created a supporting system for them to interact. They're usually stay-at-home moms, and my mom was one of them, where she took turn in hosting women in our neighborhood for this coffee ceremony. And in that space are places where I heard valuable things as a child, and I also saw a network of women connecting at the lowest level, right? You know, just congregating on a daily basis to create that support system. And it meant a lot to me. And it also helped me identify how my identity, my history, where I come from, continues to shape me as a leader, as a woman, as a mother. So I thought I would start off with a question to you, First Lady. How do you identify yourself?
First of all, thanks for that question, Audium. Deputy Mayor Audium. I will call her Audium. We're friends as well. Mm-hmm. And I'll answer that in just a minute. First of all, I want to start off and I want to affirm this audience. I want to tell you how beautiful I think it is to see you here in present, and I know there are a lot of people who are online, and just to thank you for your energy and your commitment to women. Because what that means is that you're about helping each other. And in order for the world to change, we need you. We need each other, all of us. And for those of you who are online and can't see the faces of the audience, this is a diverse audience. And so what it says to me is that you care about each other and each other's cultures and communities, and that's how we lift each other up. So I'll start with that first, to affirm you and to thank you. So in terms of how I identify myself, my husband gave a little bit of information about that, but I do think that, and I will tell you that Audium and I have talked about some of the questions that came in early. And as I think about what I've seen on the questions, what I want you to know is, well, first of all, a couple of things, the way I see the world. I am from, as my husband said, a military family. My father was a career military man. That's how we moved out here. My family's from Washington, D.C., so East Coast, which in some ways can be a little more structured, right? We're a little less formal out here, and I appreciate that. The other aspect of myself and my self-definition is that I do not hear well. I wear hearing aids. It's a genetic issue in my family. And so when I define myself, and even as I looked at some of the questions that came in about race and gender, I also thought about the invisible ways that we're differently abled. I don't like the word disabled, because with my hearing aids, I hear it quite well. But as a child, I did not. And so I always had to sit in the front of the class. I'm very conscious of that, right? The ways that we're differently abled that we're not aware of. And that crosses all genders and all races as well. So that's another one. The other thing is in terms of being a minority. So you may not know this, but among Christians, Black Catholic people, African Americans, are 6% of Catholics. Actually, 4% of Catholics and 6% of African Americans. That's a minority within a minority. My family was very Catholic. My grandparents founded a church in Washington, D.C. My great-grandparents did. That's still there. And then the other thing is being a military child. How many of you are military children? Okay, great. So you'll understand what I'll say here. Growing up living in different parts of the world, right? you learn, and moving around, you learn to embrace others quickly, right? There's a good and there's a bad, right? There's the pain of leaving, but there's also learning how to reach out to others. And that's very much a part of me. My father was a decorated war veteran. My parents are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So when I go to DC, which is my hometown, as I said, I very often go to Arlington. I am a proud American. And I want to say that because so often we see the flag used in ways that are that make us feel that it belongs to one group. But I am a true patriot. I love our country. I'm proud to be an American woman. I am an African American woman. But that also means that as an American, I embrace all cultures, right? All of those cultures. And in Seattle, all of our cultures are important. Whether you're, Scandinavian or Native or African American, because that's what makes us one Seattle, which I believe in. Okay.
That's wonderful. I just love the diversity and how you talked about every experience, continues to shape you. And I feel the same way too. I come
Yes.
all the way from Ethiopia.
Yes.
At age 19, I came here to school. It was a little bit fearful.
Yeah.
I was away from home, far, far away.
Yes.
I couldn't go back home to do laundry. It was
Yes.
oceans away, right? So, and I see as a leader, those experiences continue to shape me.
Yes.
I am one out of 8
Yes.
children, so collaborative space
Yes.
means a lot to me because
Yes.
those are the skills that I set up. So with those diverse background experiences, how do you actively communicate with women to make them feel included? And if you could specifically talk about, as a woman of color in the workplace, are there special ways in which to lift up other women? Just experiences that you can
Yes.
share in that space.
Yes, for sure. So I do think that lifting up other women is critical. And, we hear about mentoring in particular is one way, but I also think sponsorship is another. And that's identifying women for roles. And most of the time when someone sponsors you, you didn't even know that it's being done, right? There are organizations. I fortunately right now have access to lots of groups and lots of organizations. And so I'm consciously thinking of people that names that I can bring forward. What I will say too is that, the other thing that Bruce didn't tell you is that I'm on the board of the Washington State chapter of the International Women's Forum, which, if you look it up, is a wonderful organization of about 8,000 women around the world, leaders. And our state chapter has about 250 members. It's a great organization. I'll say from a leadership perspective so the first thing for me is, I think my husband would say that I have a pretty thick skin, right? Some of the things that people might think of as microaggressions, I probably don't even see, right? So that's the first thing. I'm not as sensitive, and some of this comes from, I had as my husband said, my mother. Well, you don't know this, but my mother was a teacher. She passed away from an aneurysm when I was about 11 or 12, and very blessed to have had her and my father instill a very strong sense of confidence, right? And so that feeling of, I've talked to lots of groups of women, imposter syndrome, right? That feeling of, do I belong? Am I comfortable, right? I was forced to deal with a lot of that early. But that didn't make me insensitive to what my sisters feel, right? And that crosses race, definitely, and culture. And what I've always tried to do is to be active in the women's movement, right? And I still am. And from a workplace standpoint, I'm also very comfortable speaking up when I see things that are not right. For instance, as a leader, one thing that leaders can do, and Bruce actually mentioned this when he mentioned audience, that when he talked about that meeting that he was in with you, that it's important for us as leaders to make sure that we stop and ask and listen to the voices that don't talk all the time, right? And I mean, when I was at Microsoft in my last job, women were 6.67%, according to Forbes magazine, of the job title level that I was in, right? So 93% of the time, I was in meetings with all men, right? And so, so in a scenario like that, yes, the organization needs to be sensitive, but we as individuals also have to empower ourselves and believe that we have a right to be there, right? So that's that internal confidence. So it's sort of meeting in the middle, right? The organization, we as women need to soften the organizations. As leaders, we need to make sure that we're listening and that we're being inclusive. And we each, just like you're in this room today and those who are online, who are leaning in, right? We have to make sure that we make our voices heard. That's the other part of it.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. Keep your light, your internal light shining constantly, and you're yourself your own advocate. And I remember like the first 15 years of my career in the Seattle Department of Transportation, I was the only Black woman engineer for 15 years.
Yeah.
And it was a very lonely place. But I had to figure out how I create support system, and also internally, I call it a reset value.
Yeah.
And it's, I have to constantly tag that reset button to make sure that I, validate myself, right? So knowing what you know, and you've talked a lot about ways in which to empower women. What are some of the ways in which women can tackle the challenges and come up from a strength position in the workplace?
Yes. That is a great question. And as I thought about a version of that question that I received earlier, I mean, there are so many ways, but I think I've touched on the first one. And, there's another question, too, that I always ask myself, and that is, what message do I want to really leave with you? And I think one way is to remember that whatever it is that you see on the other side. So let's say the mayor walks in, right? And he walks by you and he doesn't say anything, right? That's not about you. Right? He's probably thinking about something else or whatever. So the first thing that I would say is remember, it's not personal. Right? It's really not personal. So often what happens is indicative of the other person. Right? But what we do is we internalize it. Oh, and especially let's say you had a meeting with them, a week ago, right? And there's one or two things that didn't go quite right or questions you wish you had answered differently. That's always the way it is, right? Just remember that it's not about you, right? That whatever it is, generally it's about the other person. I think the other thing too that as I was thinking about this is that this notion of leaning in, and the question of, and what I mean by leaning in is, when I look at most of the really great opportunities in my life, they've happened because I reached out or I connected to someone to help them in what they're doing, right? So my husband didn't talk about my career in the telephone company, but with US West, AT&T. But what I would say there is that I ended up volunteering to work on a community program. So that's the other thing. When there are opportunities to engage with your colleagues, do it, right? I worked on this program. I ended up designing this initiative, and I said I'd, lead it. Our company won a presidential citation for outstanding community development work, right? I didn't know it was my company president's dream to go to the White House and be recognized, right? This was a conservative white man from Eastern Oregon. I was on that plane with him for a day. He asked me to go with him. And I'll tell you, he became the best mentor that I have ever had in my life. So what I'm saying is lean in and think about the other person and what they might need instead of yourself, right? That's the thing. Good deeds really do help. And when you help someone else on something that they care about, it comes back to you, and you're not even trying to have it come back. So, okay.
And I just want to take a moment to speak a lot about your generosity in terms of your time. For the time that I've known First Lady, You're a very generous and graceful person. You give your time to people. You stop and connect with folks. And I'm one of the privileged people that you've connected with, which I completely appreciate. So with that theme, can you share an inspirational moment that had helped you to guide your path to pursue a career in education and technology?
Yes. So, and this is another one. I thought about it, and it goes way back when our family moved here when I was in high school, and I was a very good math student, right? And I remember I was in my calculus class. I was the only African American person in there. There weren't that many girls, and I remember we were still new, and I raised my hand to answer a question. I was feeling very tentative, and the teacher didn't call on me. Right? I went home to my father and I said, Daddy, why do I have to go to that school? Why do I blah, 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 blah? He said to me, he said, well, and he asked me what happened and I explained. I said, well, he didn't call me. He said, well, then what that means is you need to learn to make yourself heard, right? He said, tomorrow when you go back, if he doesn't call on you, then stand up and say, Mr. Mr. Blah, blah, Mr. Cooper, I have an idea for that. He said, and do it in a way that's positive, that's helpful to the class. He said, because you are not changing schools, right? You have to learn to deal with it. And so, and the other thing he said is, again, it's not personal, but remember this too, that sometimes the people who seem most resistant, as you work with them, they're the ones who become your biggest supporters. And so that stayed with me throughout my life, which is partly why I think of myself as fairly resilient. And again, as I look at you in your careers, right, I've seen some heads nodding as I've spoken. I think it comes back to that. Don't let someone push you into a corner, right? Don't internalize that, they did this to me. Push forward, right? We have this International Women's Day because women pushed, because men pushed, right? That's why we're here. Right? That's why you're here. The city supported this. Men supported it, women, and our mayor supported it, who was a man. So remember, others are in the struggle with us, but we have to do our part and stand up and be heard and help each other.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. A great way to segue to questions. The audience, yeah. So we have 10 more minutes. First Lady can take questions. I can take questions if you have questions, but she has more interesting stories to tell. So are there any questions?
I answered all of them, my goodness. Yes.
Good morning. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Yeah.
Right? You dropped a lot of nuggets here today and appreciate being here, but what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I'll just tell you about something about myself. So I am in the middle in terms of being introverted and extroverted, right? I'm very task-oriented, so that drives me to be more extroverted. But I do think that what I said earlier about engaging, right, is so important because once people get to know you, right, once they see who you are and the positive energy, right, people are attracted to that. You know that old saying, you catch more, flies with sugar than with vinegar, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, let your light shine through. Your good light, your good energy. Be embracing of everybody, of every culture, right? I mean, I'm a student of history, right? I know my history, right? Personal and from a cultural standpoint, but you know what? I also know other history, right? My husband's half Japanese, right? I know Japanese history and Korean history and European history. I recently went to the Nordic Museum, right? Why? Because that's Seattle history. We live here. We need to understand. And I wish I had known, this is something I've learned over my lifetime, but we're Seattleites. Your history is my history. Our history is different. There's similarity, right? Your history is my history. Because we live here, we share this space. So I would say see the world in a more expansive way outside of yourself. Embrace others. Go to the Wing Luke Museum if you haven't been there. Go to the African American Museum if you haven't been there. Go to the Nordic Museum. That's what I wish I had known earlier. And I've learned it along the way, but I'm glad to share it with you. It is so important. Lean into each other's culture, because this is our place, this city, this space is our space. And it's this history of the people who came here collectively that make it what it is now. And understanding that is how we change that most effectively. Good question, thank you.
I love it.
Yeah, I do have a question. It's very impressive, all that you've done. But is it, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Thanks,
it's
Elaine.
very impressive, all that you've done. I'd like to know, is there something, like in the back of your mind, that you still want to do? Some area that you still want to get involved in, that inspires you, that pushes you forward?
That's a good question, Lynn. A specific area, I wouldn't say that there's a specific area. I am committed, very committed, to supporting my husband in the work that he does. As Audium knows, there are initiatives that I've been very engaged in, right? The Reach Out initiative is one for sure, the Liberty Project, and then there are others, right? The inner city visit to Detroit, for instance, working with the chamber. So at this point in my life, I don't really have any career mountains to climb at all. I guess it's really about giving back and engaging. The role of the mayor is a pretty big job, especially right now. And, working with him and helping him as a part of his team, as his wife, which I am, I have his name. That's one question you haven't asked me that a lot of audiences ask me. And that is, how do you, as a woman who's, had her own career, suddenly you're under the name of someone else, right? The shadow of, I don't see it that way, right? I've worked in every campaign he had. I am committed to him being a great mayor, and I'm committed to doing everything that I can. He didn't tell you that we have 3 children who are grown adults who are, off in their fields. Each one has their master's degree in their field. We have 2 granddaughters. That's another thing I'm very committed to as well, from a family standpoint, doing everything I can to support them, right? And to continue to learn. One of my main goals in life is to make sure that as I age, that I become even more open and less judgmental, right? And more inclusive and more understanding. And it's all about love. You'll hear Bruce talk about love, but it's about being more loving. And that's something that each one of us can strive for, right? And that's why I say, get out of our own worlds, get and understand this place, these people who shaped it. Because now we're shaping it, and we'll want them in the future to understand us. So thanks for the question, Elaine. I appreciate it.
First Lady, we do have a question online from our online audience, and I believe
Okay.
Julia is going to read the question for you.
Yeah, First Lady Harrell, thanks for this great question. How important is legacy to you, and what legacy do you hope to leave?
That's a good one. So I think that legacy comes through the life that's lived. My life goal is to leave the world better through the love I share, the example I set, and consistently giving my best, right? What does love look like? Love looks like us being in this room together, right? There are other things I could have been doing today, right? I missed my yoga class. Right? It's the desire to connect and to do that and share when I can, right? Example, I am the First Lady, right? I'm very conscious of the example I set. Like, for instance, as a Black woman, right? But as a woman, my hair is not dyed. That was a conscious decision, right? After sitting in a room at Microsoft with 17 men and 3 women, all in the same age group, all of us had our hair dyed. Not a man in there did. I looked and I thought, why do I have to do this when I don't want to? And I stopped, right? The women in here who have curly hair or kinky or coily hair will understand from an example standpoint. I decided I'm not going to straighten it anymore. I don't want to put chemicals in it anymore, right? That's a message. I can't tell you how many young people look at me and just do like this and nod, right? So it's the example. And consistently doing my best, right? I mean, I see the heads nodding. It's to do the best we can, not just for ourselves, but for others, to help others, right? Audium put a lot of work into this today, right? And trying to be ready. Why? Because she cares about you, right? To do a good job. That's what that's about. It's not about me. It's about helping others. And it all comes down to sharing our love, our gifts, our talents to make the world better and to help others. That's what Bruce does. There are lots of things our mayor could have done from a career standpoint. Trust me, I know this. Right? But he chose to do this. And he's always told me that he wanted to help others. So that's what I'm about. I don't think about the conscious legacy. I want people to remember me for this and that and that and that. Because over time, most of us, our names fade. And that's fine. But through my children, through the people I touch, to the people that I shape or impart an idea or help along the way, that's what a legacy is. That's how I define my legacy.
Very powerful. Very powerful. One last question. Two. We do. Great. Okay. Back there.
My question is, what role has self-trust played in your journey?
Okay, so self-trust, that's an interesting one. I haven't heard it displayed that or communicated quite that way. I take self-trust to mean competence, right? The belief in oneself. I was very fortunate, like I said earlier, my mother told me, my father, my family, you are smart, right? So I've never doubted my intelligence, right? Nobody could ever take that. When I was in the 6th grade, I went through these, I was in a school system where they put you in tracks. And I went through this set of tests, and my principal and counselor called me in and said, there's nothing you can't learn, right? You are really smart. So I was in a high, and so that belief in my intelligence and the affirmation, and I had I have a sister, right, who was my dearest friend other than my husband. And my father expected the same thing, and I have two brothers, the same thing from his daughters as he did his sons. Just like my husband, we have 2 sons and 1 daughter, expected the same thing from our daughter that he did our sons, right? And so self-trust for me it's a foundational thing, right? But that doesn't mean that those of you who grew up not having that can't get it, because you can, right? It's the affirming. It's to make sure that you're around positive people, right? One other thing I'll impart to you since you asked this question, one thing that I believe that I learned is avoid the unlucky and the unhappy, because their misery is infectious. So you have to be careful, because there are others who, because maybe they're not happy inside, right? They can infect you with malaise. So that's the other thing. We have to be conscious of what's around us and constantly refill our bucket by knowing ourselves. Did I answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Miss Barbara. Yeah. Sorry. And I'll come to you next.
First, teacher, we speak very loudly. First, I've known you for quite some time, and I would just like to say you were inspirational to me, and I know I can speak for the other ladies here.
Thank you.
You gave us some wisdom, some thought that we will take from here.
Thank you.
And I would just like to say, and I've known her and her husband for some time.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yes.
I just like to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your affirmation. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is about balance. When you talk about the many hats you wear, mother, I'm a single mom, grade age kids. I started late. I'm in my 50s, so I have young kids, career in IT, several boards. Just how do you balance that? Because some days I just feel like, the motherhood thing. I don't want to raise messed up kids, and I need to focus on that. But I want to spread love in the world. I want to, give back, and you're doing all these things.
Yeah.
Just talk to us about balancing
Yes.
all these hats and being the wife, the first lady,
Yeah.
the wife of the mayor. Thank you.
That's a very good question. So, there are so many things that go through my head there. It's things that people told me when my children were young. One person, actually Jeff Rodman, who was the founder of Costco, told me, he said, Joanne, remember one thing. You will only be as happy as your least happy child. Your least happy child. And I remember thinking, oh God, I've got 3. I better focus. And so that was one thing. And that was one thing that made me focus. I don't want to say a negative did, but it stayed in my head. That was one thing. The second thing is that it's hard to have everything at the same time, right? It's hard to feel balanced when you're stressed, right? And the reality is we only have so much bandwidth, right? And so what I'd say on that is that, like I said, I think it's priority. I think that the children, or at least in my head, right, my children had to be my priority, right? But we were fortunate to have our life set up so that Bruce's mother, who retired as an accountant with the library system here, helped us. I mean, she retired so she could be supportive of us. So that's the other thing, when you can design in your support systems, right? And as mothers, certainly when it's your mother-in-law, sometimes it's hard to be as close, right? But she was, small Japanese lady, one of my most dearest friends in life. So that's not an exact prescription, but I would say focus. I think that at the end of the day, for us as women, we get judged on our children. I mean, whether we like it or not, we do, right? And so that's got to be a priority. And that's even why we work, right? So you can take care of them. And they may not understand it all the time. My daughter told me when she was a sophomore in college, she came home from school and she says, Mom, I was mad at you all the time. I was thinking, I know that. She said, I was mad at you all the time because you worked. She said, but now I understand. And now I'm proud of you. Right? So it doesn't happen all at once, right? We go through these hard times, but keep your eye on the prize, on where you want to be with them, and you'll be fine.
Well said. Well said. All right. Question.
Thank you both for this amazing panel. You spoke about sponsorship and mentorship, and I'm
Yes.
curious for you what it's been like to identify mentors in your career and how to kind of make that ask of them, but also how you've identified people that you've wanted to give that to.
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. Again, I've been really fortunate that most of the great mentors in my life, and I'm thinking of not just mentors, but people who have helped me and really helped me along the way. I mean, when you're in a company that, let's just say Microsoft is a different world. It's a great company, right? I'm very glad I was there. And yet, there are hard times. And it's interesting because you never know where the support will come from, right? I mean, I would say the top person who was a mentor and sponsor to me at Microsoft is a Latino man from Colombia, an executive vice president. Steve Ballmer brought me into the company. But and in each case, I did work for them, right? When I was president of United Way of King County, I got to know the Microsoft team. And then I worked with my Colombian American sponsor because I did work for him, right? So once you do work with them, then it's easier to lean in. I find it easier to ask for mentorship with people that I know, people who know me. But I think that's really, it's incredibly important, right? And that's the other reason that I think that it's important to be helpful to engage in the ways that you can with the people that you work with, right? And the other thing that I learned is to know your boss's extended team, right? Because those are the people who shape your careers, who are sitting there in the room talking about opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, she could say, yes, she knows, talking about opportunities. So reach out and get to know folks. Be that bright light in the room. I hope I gave you some points that are helpful. Was that? And you can ask me afterwards if you'd like to. So, yeah.
All righty. Any other questions?
How y'all doing today?
Good, thank you.
Thank you for speaking and imparting us with your wisdom and your knowledge. My question is, you spoke about history, knowing what we know about history and what has led us to where we are today, and being in today's climate where everything seems to be moving at a microwave pace, right? How do we move forward and be on the other side of history, right? Knowing now that it's a chess game, what we're up against, the resources that we have, how do we now get in front of it and change the narrative going forward and for generations to come?
That's a huge question. Yes, you're getting some hands on that. So what I would say is that each one of us is an individual in a community, right? Each one of us is powerful with one group or another. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your children, maybe it's your church, maybe it's this group. And so each of us has an opportunity and a right and a privilege to try to drive change where we are, right? So for instance, like I said, I mean, with my family, I'm making sure we all go to all the museums, right? Understand all of Seattle, right? I'm taking Black folks to the Nordic Museum, right? I mean, so each of us has to step forward to do our part. And it comes back to International Women's Day. Carry the message forward, right? To other women who are not here, to your daughters, to your sons, right? Each of us has to do our part to drive the vision that we believe in for the world that we want. And for me, it comes back to One Seattle. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, that was a beautiful question. I just want to add to that too, like just being intentional. When we are in leadership space, be intentional. Provide folks opportunity. Create space, right? The First Lady talked about the diversity of like thoughts and experiences that come to a space that makes us all look whole and beautiful, right? Or we create like beautiful outcome because of our diverse experiences or lived experiences. And just be intentional. Give people opportunity. The mayor gave me opportunity. I'm an engineer in politics, for crying out loud, right? Right? It just does not make sense, right? But somebody opened up that door.
Yes.
He saw me, right? When he talked about that, being in that space of when we were talking about the initiative about surveillance ordinance, he saw what I could bring to the table.
Yes.
He saw my leadership skills being in that space, not necessarily to occupy the space, but provide opportunity for my employees to showcase themselves.
Yes.
As a leader, I don't need to lead. So be intentional. That's how we change path and outcomes. So let's all engage. Any other? Oh, there you go.
One more, please.
Hi, I work in Seattle IT, which is a male-dominated
Yes.
department, and you have experience working in IT.
Yes, I do.
I find myself still, after like 30 years total in IT, as sometimes the only woman or only few women in the room, spending too much time in my head trying to quiet myself down or not worry about I'm taking up too much space in the room or I'm providing too many ideas or asking too many questions. And then after I get out of that situation, again, I'm in my head, like,
Yes.
I talk too much, I took up too much room, and I don't think any of the people that identify as men are going through that mental gymnastics. And I'm just wondering if what have you done in your career to kind of get out of your own head, I guess, and just, I don't know if it's like a trust or just don't worry about what other people are thinking and just be you. I'm just wondering if you have any advice for how to do that as a person who identifies as a woman.
That's really a good question because I think that's quite normal. And I'll tell you though, I was speaking to a group, and it was probably 60% male, 70. But a woman had asked me a question similar to yours, and she also talked about imposter syndrome. And I've heard this question over and over. And I asked the audience, I said, how many of you have this? Do you know that almost every man's hand went up? So that's the first thing. We always think, oh, I'm just the only one carrying this, but the guys have it too, right? I mean, I thought I saw, if there was, the guy right there, right? I think you're a guy. Okay, I want to be respectful. Have you ever had that? I mean, as she was talking, see? I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I did, right? And there's another one there too. See, his head is nodding too, right? So that's the first thing, to realize that it's not just you. And then the other thing I'm going to show you that a senior VP at Microsoft taught me in these rooms, right? So, okay, the first thing is when you're in a meeting, remember this, you're there to make a point or two or a few. If you don't see anything, then you may as well not be there. So what she taught me is, she says, Joanne, when you're, and again, because she loud voices, she said, Joanne, learn to do this. When you're ready to make a point, have a cup, right? And do like this, right? I mean, it just so happens, you just kind of, and it pulls it. So that's one thing too, for those of you who tend to be the more quiet voices, right? But the other thing is that the good news is, you're in your head. Right? So since you know that, you've acknowledged it to all of us. You've said it out loud. Right? You know that you need to get out of your head. Right? I would say, I don't know what your peers or your bosses look like or what your trust level is, but make sure that you get some feedback after a meeting. Get some real feedback from someone you trust. Right? Because odds are the points you are making are exactly what are needed. Right? But it's inside you. This is what I'm saying. Sometimes these voices, especially the negative voices, are inside of our heads. Look in the mirror and tell yourself, when you look at yourself in the mirror, right? I'm in that meeting because I need to be. I should be. My points are valid. Talk to yourself. Talk to yourself. Because you're probably on the right track, right? How many of you think she's probably on the right track? Yeah. See? Good question. Thank you.
That's a good one. All right.
We got another one from the chat.
Okay.
First Lady, what did you learn from losing your mother so very early? And can you expound?
Yes.
Can you expound on imposter syndrome a little and how you got past it and learned to thrive from it?
Yeah. Okay, so that's two questions.
We kind of covered the
two big questions. So the first one, in terms of losing my mother, and I spoke at an organization called Safe Crossings that's here in Seattle that is focused specifically on young people who have lost loved ones. There is nothing more painful for a child than to lose a parent, or those of you who have lost siblings when you're young. And what I will say is that one reason I mentioned being in a military family is that, I saw my father cry one time in my life, and he was sitting at the table after my mother had passed away, and he picked himself up and he just said, she told me what she wanted done, and I'm going to do it. Right? And so out of that, I learned resilience. I learned faith. Right? I learned that you have to focus forward. You have to believe, you have to believe in the positive and in all the messages that I was given, which were positive messages. We need to see the blessings around us. That's the other thing. I told you I missed my yoga class today, but one of the beautiful things of yoga is that, there's a centering. And when you're a child who goes through that, you never lose it. But it also, now that I'm older, it makes me very grateful for my life, for the people around me. So, that's a whole conversation, right? But for those of you who have children or are close to people who have lost people, Safe Crossings is a wonderful organization here in Seattle. And then imposter syndrome, I mean, that's one from a lot of self-talk. Some of you may remember on Saturday Night Live, years ago, there was a guy named Dana Carvey, and he'd stand in the mirror and he'd look at himself and he'd say, you know, I'm wonderful, I'm magical, and people love me, right? Right? I mean, that's why I tell you self-talk, it works. Self-talk really works, admitting it, that you've got it. But the only way you get over it is that you get over it, because it's inside you. That's the thing. It's inside you. It's a barrier that you have. It's just like when Adim and I walked up those stairs, right? We had to walk up the stairs ourselves. And that's the way imposter syndrome is, right? There are lots of ways to get over it, but the main thing is that it's inside you is your barrier. Just like the guys said here too. They have it too. So it's confidence is practice, right? And you know, and it's growth. Over time, some of this stuff drops away. That's the nice thing about getting older.
Great. Okay. 2 more minutes left to wrap up. So last question. If not, we can wrap it up early too.
Oh,
but-
there's someone.
Oh, there's one. Great. Cody.
Oh, I don't have a problem saying no. I mean, I say that, I don't say that lightly, but I get a lot of requests to do a lot of things. And some of which are very desirable, very interesting, but I'm clear about what's important to me, right? And so, you know, so I you know, have a rubric that I go through, but I've learned to ask people, what is it that you really want? Right? What are you really looking for here? Why do you want me to come? Right? Which can make some people uncomfortable, but I am pretty direct because it's my time, it's my life, right? And it was through that we ended up with Reach Out, right? One of the individuals reached out and asked me to go on a tour of something that I didn't think I needed a tour. And so, you know, through our conversation, I realized what that focus was, right? And out of that, something good happened, which is our Reach Out initiative. So it's just being clear about what's important. And remember, we only have so much time. That's the other thing. And the good thing is, you know, I have a partner who understands me. I mean, we've been married over 3 decades now. He ought to. And, you know, and vice versa. And so there are some things that, and I have a rubric, a prioritization that I go through. That's probably the best answer that I can give you. But I'm not afraid to say no, just like I'm not afraid to say yes. Sometimes I say yes a little too much still, though. Good question. Thank you.
Well, I just want to take a moment to thank you.
Thank you.
And this has been such a privilege. So why don't you guys help me thank First Lady Joanne Harrell.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.